in the laboratory. Many, many years of research went into applying this principle in the lab. And once it was shown and said, lots of research was being conducted, a lot of data was being taken. And so then it became applied to humans. And so this is one of the procedures that we use to change behaviors. More specifically, it's a principle that we use to increase desirable behavior in individuals. And so, yes, it is a component of many, if not all, behavior modification procedures. So it just depends on, whether you're trying to increase or decrease behavior. Okay, so all of that is depending on that. And I did upload the. Sorry. All right. So what is reinforcement? This is basic definition. It is the process by which the occurrence of a behavior is immediately resulted in a consequence, and as a result, the future likelihood of that behavior will increase. So you have a behavior occurs, right? Behavior occurs, that's the first thing. Then, whether some type of consequence happens, and we're going to be more specific because there's actually two types of reinforcement, but for just reinforcement in general, some type of consequence that happens immediately after the behavior results in the behavior increasing in the future. And so the future is a key term because it's not just that behavior that we're worried about. So maybe consequence was given after the behavior, and at that moment, the behavior increased. No, we don't care about that. That's not an example of reinforcement. Reinforcement is in the future, did that behavior increase? If it increased, then yes, you can say, that was due to reinforcement. So, for example, if, let's say, Tommy ate all his vegetables, so behavior is eating vegetables. Immediately after he ate his vegetables, he was given a piece of cake. So he was presented with a consequence, right? He was given dessert. So next time Tommy was presented with a plate of vegetables, and if he ate his vegetables, then yes, that's an example of reinforcement. Okay? Does that make sense?
So there's no prize again, right?
You can. So that's something else. Yes, if it's a behavior that you are trying to increase, and we're going to talk about schedules of reinforcement, then if we're trying to get the behavior to occur, then yeah, we probably will in the beginning, after every response, give them a reinforcer. But then we're going to start to fade it out because sometimes there isn't dessert at the end of eating vegetables. So he'll just have to generalize that behavior. But yeah, we'll talk about that. Okay, so yeah, all right. So the effects of reinforcement on behavior. There are different ways. It just depends. If we're trying to increase the frequency, so let's say Tommy's not even eating vegetables at all, and so we're trying to get him to eat veggies, and we're going to use a reinforcement procedure, so we're going to increase the number of times he eats his vegetables, right? Let's say it's supposed to be 3 times a day, whatever it is. Then, yes, reinforcement can have an effect on the frequency of behavior. You can use reinforcement to increase the duration of a behavior. So how long, let's say, doing homework. Let's say for Tommy, doing homework is very aversive, and just asking him to sit down at the table, is such a challenge for him, and he immediately bolts from the table every time you present his homework, and he just doesn't want to do it. Or let's say he will sit there for 30 seconds and then leave. So we want that duration to sit at the table and complete his homework to increase. So yeah, we could use reinforcement to increase the duration that Tommy sits at the table. Okay? And then also intensity. So let's say you are working on how many pounds you can, let's say, bench press, right? The intensity of the weight that you can lift. So let's say after so many times of weightlifting, whatever, you get, reinforced. And then at the end, okay, now I'm going to work harder, right? So I can get reinforced again. And so that intensity will increase. And then you can also increase your quickness of the response from the demand or whatever is asked of that person. So, for example, decrease in latency. So having them, Tommy, go pick up your room or go put your toys away. Okay? If we want to decrease the amount of time it takes for him to actually get up and go to his room and comply with a demand, we could use reinforcement procedures to decrease the latency. Okay? So these are just examples of the effects of reinforcement. Now we use reinforcement on operant behavior. Okay, because remember, this is what Skinner really focused on, was on operant behavior. And what operant behavior basically is any behavior that is observable and measurable, right? Something that we can see, any type of action, if, even verbal behavior. So speaking, words, communication, all of that are still examples of behaviors that we could take data on. So this is just, I think it's straight from the book, behavior that is strengthened through the process of reinforcement, and then behavior that is controlled by its consequences. So depending on the consequence in the environment, that is what's going to control whether the behavior increases or decreases. Okay? So for example, let's say that you work at Target. Okay? You put in your 40 hours a week. You get paid every 2 weeks. You know you get paid, right? So that's why you work. You go in, you work, you get paid. But let's say 1 month they say, oh, we can't pay you this month. Do you think you're going to put in the same amount of hours? No. So would that be an example of operant behavior? Yes or no? Yes? Why? Controlled by your consequences. Meaning money, right, is an example of a reinforcer because it is something that is presented, right? After you work your 40 hours a week or 80 in 2 weeks, right? You work your 80 hours, you get paid. You get presented with something. You have a consequence. Once there is no consequence, let's say you're not going to get paid, that behavior is going to decrease. So the consequence is what controls your behavior. Does that make sense to everybody? Yes? Okay. So what is a reinforcer? I did kind of mention that earlier. And I don't want you to get reinforcer confused with reinforcement. Reinforcement is the actual process. It's the whole process, okay, of a behavior, of a consequence being either delivered or removed following the behavior, right? And in the future, it's going to increase. Well, reinforcer is the actual consequence, okay? So immediately after the behavior occurs, if something is presented to the individual, and in the future that behavior increases, then that is what's known as a reinforcer. So for example, Tommy eating his vegetables, he was given a piece of cake. The cake itself is known as a reinforcer. That would be an example. Because it is some type of stimulus or event. So stimulus can be any type of item or object. And so in that case, it's the cake. And immediately after it was presented, that in the future, Tommy ate his vegetables. So his behavior increased. Okay? And in your book, let's go to page 64 so we can kind of look through some examples. Just in case it might be a little confusing. On page 64, table 4.1. Okay, so let's look at number 1 as an example. And it's really important. I know right now it might seem like, yeah, this makes sense. But you have to be so good at this that if you were to look at an example, you would be able to outline all the different parts. You know, is this the reinforcement procedure? What's the operant behavior? What's the reinforcer? You need to make sure you know all of those elements in the different examples that I'm going to give you. So, for example, number 1, a child cries at night after being put to bed, and her parents come to her room to comfort her and calm her down. As a result, the child now cries more often at bedtime. So, from this example, what would you say is the operant behavior that we're looking at? Crying, right? So the child's crying. That's the operant behavior. And then, what do you think is the reinforcer? The parent's attention, right? The comforting and calming her down. So parent's attention walking into the room. And is this an example of reinforcement?
Yes.
Why?
Because every time they cry.
Because what?
Every time she cries, they go, like they give her the attention.
Because the behavior occurred again.
Because the behavior occurred in the future, and it increased. Right. So it says right here, as a result, the child now cries more often at bedtime. So now, hey, I cry, mom and dad come in, and they comfort me. So guess what? Next time, same thing. They cry, parent comes in, comforts them, and so it's just going to keep going. Okay, because they were reinforced for that behavior. All right, yes.
Sorry, question. Now, obviously parents do have to go in and check on their child as well.
Oh, yeah.
So how would they define what is normal and the child doing that again due to that and an actual reinforcement?
Oh, well, so this is a child, and typically obviously if it's a baby, right, an infant, they can't speak, and so that's their form of communication, right, to let us know if they need something. But depending on the age of, you have to look into it. Yeah, the age of the child, make sure there's no medical conditions, and then once you've ruled out everything, and you can then say that it is a behavior, nothing's wrong with her. She just, 8 o'clock comes and she cries. Then that's when we would, look into it and, okay, well, if you see here, every time she does, you go in. So as long as we know that nothing else is wrong, then you can say it's a behavior, and then you would be able to use behavior modification. Good question. Okay, number 2. A woman waiting for a bus opens up her umbrella when it rains. The umbrella keeps the rain from hitting her. Now she always opens up her umbrella when it rains. So in this case, what is the operant behavior that we would be looking at? Opening up her umbrella. And what's the reinforcer?
Not getting wet.
Not getting wet, keeping the rain away. Yeah, not getting wet would be the reinforcer, right? So she opens up her umbrella to avoid getting wet. Okay, bless you.
Thank you.
Number 3, when a chef cooks well-done steak, it the exhaust fan and the smoke is sucked out of the kitchen. He is now more likely to turn on the fan when he cooks well-done steaks. What's the operant behavior? Turning on the exhaust fan and the reinforcer?
The clearing of smoke.
Clearing the smoke. Yeah, the smoke is gone. Exactly. Okay. So these are just a couple. You guys can, look at the rest of them. Actually, let's look at this one. Let's look at number 8. A 2-year-old child has a tantrum, crying and screaming in the grocery store when he demands candy, and his mother says no. His mother eventually buys him the candy, and he stops his tantrum. As a result, the mother is more likely to give him candy when he demands it and has a tantrum. In addition, the child is more likely to have a tantrum in the store because it results in receiving candy, which this is quite common, right? Everywhere we go, we probably do it ourselves. Those of you all that have kids, or you've seen people, you're there in line waiting, and you see the little kid crying, screaming, and they want the candy or they want the toy, and right, parent just gives it to them. So in this case, what is the operant behavior? Tantruming. Okay, so crying and screaming is the operant behavior, and what is the reinforcer for it?
The candy the mother gave.
The candy, right? Getting candy. So this is an example of reinforcement. Yes. Okay, we'll go with that for now. Okay.
Like a double reinforcement?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yes, I was gonna wait, but yes, it is. So what's another operant behavior here?
The mother buying candy and the boy.
The mother giving the candy. Okay, so mother's giving candy, and what's her reinforcer? The child stops crying and screaming. So yes, it is both. And we're going to talk about 2 types of reinforcement. Okay, so there are 2 types. There's positive and negative reinforcement. I don't want you to think that because it says negative, that means it's something bad or aversive. Do not confuse negative reinforcement with punishment, because that is a common mistake. Okay, so make sure you don't do that. We'll talk about punishments, I think, next week. But for right now, what you do need to know is that depending whether it is positive or negative reinforcement, the consequence is still going to be the same in the future. So whether you use positive or negative, both procedures are going to increase behavior. So what I want you to do is, if you see reinforcement, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative, you know that the behavior is going to increase. Okay? So it's both are going to make the behavior more likely to occur in the future. So positive reinforcement. We talked about reinforcers. Okay? That's that event or stimulus that is added immediately after the behavior. Well, an example of positive reinforcement is immediately after the behavior, when that reinforcer is presented. It doesn't matter whether it's a stimulus or an event. If something is added to the environment following behavior, and if in the future that behavior increases, then that's an example of positive reinforcement. Okay? So, let's look at these examples again. So, number 1, a child cries at night after being put to bed, and her parents come to her room to comfort her and calm her down. As a result, the child now cries more often at bedtime. Is this an example of, I know we said reinforcement, but which type?
Positive.
This would be positive. Yeah. Because something is presented, child cries, parents come into the room and comfort the child, right? Something's added. As a result, the crying behavior increases in the future. So this is an example of positive reinforcement. Same thing down here. The 2-year-old who tantrums, then immediately after gets presented with candy. So next time that they go to the grocery store, guess what? Tantruming is probably going to happen. If it does happen again, if it increases, then it's also an example of positive reinforcement.
A lot of people mistake that. They think, I've heard it before, that it's just like, oh, use positive reinforcement like it is a positive consequence, and it's not always a positive consequence, it's positive reinforcement.
Yes,
So,
very good.
Give the candy maybe when they're silent and happy, rather
And
than
I am going to let you all know that even on your next test, whether the example doesn't seem realistic, like, really? Why would that behavior increase or decrease? It doesn't matter. I just want you to look at whether did it increase or decrease. If it increased, whether it was a good or bad increase. So like in this case, tantruming increases. You wouldn't want that to, right? But that's what happens. So that's an example of positive reinforcement.
Would the last one have both of them?
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to go into negative, and then we'll talk about that one. But yes, it would be both. It's positive and negative, which with negative reinforcement, you have a behavior. Okay, behavior occurs. Then, when we look at what happens after the behavior, we're going to look at whether some type of aversive stimulus, so something that is not pleasant, was it removed? And immediately after it was removed, did the behavior increase? Okay? So for example, the umbrella number 2. When the woman was waiting for the bus, she opened up her umbrella when it rained, and the umbrella kept the rain from hitting her. So as from now on now, when she waits for the bus, she opens her umbrella up if she thinks it's going to rain, right? So avoiding the rain is an example of what? The rain is an example of what? An aversive stimulus. Something unpleasant. Maybe she doesn't like being wet, right? So an aversive stimulus is being removed immediately after the behavior. The behavior of opening up her umbrella, okay? She was able to remove the aversive stimulus. So and then as a result, in the future, she opened up her umbrella. Okay. Another example of negative reinforcement. Let's say you have a mosquito bite. Okay. You scratch it. It itches, so you scratch it. What is the operant behavior? Scratching. Okay. So scratching is the operant behavior. What do you think? What happens immediately after scratching? Feels good. Well, in most cases, you do it to relieve itching, right? That's what we want to do. So we scratch. That's the operant behavior. We scratch our bite to relieve itching. Relieving the itching is negatively reinforced by the scratching. Okay? So in the future, when you have a mosquito bite and it itches, what are you going to do? Scratch. Another example. Let's say you have a headache. What do you normally do if you have a headache? Take a Tylenol, right? Take an Advil. So taking Tylenol does what? Removes the pain from your head. the behavior of taking Tylenol when you have a headache is followed by the removal of the painful stimulus, which is, right, the pain in your head is removed. And so as a result, behavior is strengthened. Does that make a little more sense? Yes?
Maybe like something like to like relieve, like if you have anxiety and you do something and it like calms down your anxiety and stuff.
Yeah, but instead of anxiety, maybe we say heart rate, right? So that's something we could actually measure, but that's good, yes. We would probably take data on the heart rate, and then, yeah, as a result, if it relieves or slows it down, then that could be an example of negative reinforcement. So back to the candy store example, we know that the child's behavior of tantruming is positive reinforcement. So what would the mother's behavior, what would the procedure be for the mom? Or the principal behavior? Negative reinforcement. Why? Who can explain that? Yeah. So the behavior of giving the candy is immediately followed by the removal of the loud, screaming and crying and maybe even embarrassment, right, in the store. All of that painful stimuli is removed. And so in the future, what happens? What do you think happens in the future? Next time they go to the candy store and the child cries and tantrums, throws himself to the floor. She's probably going to give him candy, right? Oh, here, because that's what makes him stop. Okay? We all do it as parents. So, I mean, even I remember like 2 years ago, one of my students was like, oh, man, you're probably going to be an awesome parent then because you know all of the principles and, how to modify behavior. Doesn't matter. You're a parent, yeah, whatever you know, it really does. I mean, at that moment, it happens. But in cases where we are dealing with, developmental disorders or severe cases to where it actually, where the person is not able to function in their environment and it messes up with that, then yes, I mean, you do need to be consistent when applying these principles. So, all right. So escape. Okay, so further, with negative reinforcement, still on that topic, there are 2 different types of behaviors that are involved. Oh, thank you. Okay, there are 2 different types of behaviors that are involved with negative reinforcement. And one of them is escape. Okay? So with escape, let's say, for example, you are walking to school and it's looking cloudy and you're walking and then sure enough it starts pouring, right? You're getting wet, your bags are getting wet, your books are getting wet, and so immediately you put your backpack over your head. You do that to escape the aversive stimulus. So already you are experiencing that aversive stimulus. So you put the bag over your head to remove it. That's an example of negative reinforcement, dealing with escape behaviors. When you're dealing with avoidance, you're dealing with a behavior that results in the prevention of an aversive stimulus. So next time, then, you are going to avoid getting, caught in the rain by taking your umbrella and putting it in your backpack every time you come to school. So now you are avoiding, right, the aversive stimulus of getting wet. And I have some more examples to show you guys. Any questions so far? what principle does this example illustrate? You would say negative reinforcement. And if it was an example of avoidance behavior, it would still be negative reinforcement. So here's some more. Let's look at the first one. You sit down in a movie theater near a large group of kids. They are very loud during the movie, so you move to a seat far away from them to escape the noise. Is this an example of escape or avoidance behavior? Escape, because you're already sitting in a certain seat at the movie, right? That already happened. And now something aversive is going on, so now you are escaping that aversive stimulus. So those kids being loud, you're moving, further up. Okay? The next one, you walk into a movie theater and take a seat far away from a group of kids. In this way, you avoid the noise they make.
Good example.
Avoidance. So you don't even take that chance of sitting by that group of kids because the last time you did, right, you had to move away from them. Then your behavior was reinforced because you removed, right, that group of kids. They were loud, whatever. Couldn't hear the movie. You escaped. So next time you're going to avoid the situation. So you see the group of kids, and you're not even going to sit next to them. You're going to sit further away to avoid the aversive stimulus of them maybe talking to the movie, or maybe they're on their cell phones all the time. Who knows? Okay. And this is just a list of some other examples of negative reinforcement. I mean, we're not going to go through all of them, but I kind of already mentioned some. So, giving into a child screaming, we talked about that. Turning off the alarm buzzer. How many of you every morning, you set your alarm because, yes, you're going to wake up at 6 a.m., 7 a.m. But how many of you all hit the snooze button? Yeah, we all do, right? Well, the behavior of setting it off or pushing the snooze button is an example of negative reinforcement because you get to escape the aversive stimulus of having to get out of bed, right? Having to get up. So you hit the button so you can get more sleep. You avoid getting up, getting out of bed. Okay? So that's an example. And what else? We talked about, scratching your mosquito bites, turning the channel during a bad TV show, so you're watching something that you don't like. The behavior of turning the channel is increased because you don't have to sit and watch it. You can just turn it to the next station, and you avoid watching that bad TV show. So these are just some other examples that you all can look at. And I know I put this in here, but we already talked about it, which is just determining the difference between the two and how one example could have both. So just to recap again, the child's tantruming behavior was an example of positive reinforcement because it was strengthened by the parent presenting something, right? Presenting the candy. And then the parent behavior of actually giving the candy is negatively reinforced by the child's termination of tantruming, right? He or she stopped crying. Okay? All right. So now let me show you a video. And I love Big Bang Theory, and so when I saw this on one of their shows, it was a couple of years ago, I thought it was a really good example to show the procedure of operant conditioning but even more so how people can misidentify the terms. So they can define them incorrectly. So what I want you to do as you watch this is to see if you can figure out what term was defined incorrectly. Okay? And kind of see if you can identify what are the operant behaviors, what are the reinforcers, etc.
Well, thank you. How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate?
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
What was that? You said be nice to Penny. I believe offering chocolate to someone falls within the definition of nice.
It does, but in my experience, you don't.
There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy.
Yeah, now that's you, obnoxious and insufferable.
Oh, sorry, Sheldon. I almost sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you. What's this cartoon called again?
Oshikuru Demon Samurai.
It's not a cartoon. It's anime.
Anime. You know, I knew a girl in high school named Anime. Anime Fletcher. She was born with one nostril. Then she had this bad nose job and basically wound up with three.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry. Zip.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh. Hey, Kim. Yeah. You know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall. You'll never guess how they got to a place to work.
Okay. I know what you're doing.
Really?
Yes. You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior.
Very good. Chocolate?
Sheldon, you can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat.
Actually, it turns out I can.
Well, you shouldn't.
There's just no pleasing you, is there, Leonard? You weren't happy with my previous approach to dealing with her, so I decided to employ operant conditioning techniques, building on the works of Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Yet by this time next week, I believe I can have her jumping out of a pool, balancing a beach ball on her nose.
No, this has to stop now.
I'm not suggesting we really make her jump out of a pool. I thought the bazinga was implied. We're just tweaking her personality. It's sanding off the rough edges, if you will.
No, you're not sanding Penny.
Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better?
Yes, you're forbidden.
Bad, Leonard.
Oh my gosh, she did it.
What could she possibly be talking about for so long?
Obviously, waitressing at the Cheesecake Factory is a complex socioeconomic activity that requires a great deal of analysis and planning. Bazinga. You know, using positive reinforcement techniques, I could train that behavior out of her in a week.
No.
If you let me use negative reinforcement, I can get it done before we go to bed.
You're not squirting her in the face with water.
No, of course not. We're talking very mild electric shocks. No tissue damage whatsoever.
Forget it.
Oh, come on. You can't tell me that you're not intrigued about the possibility of building a better girlfriend.
I'm not. Well, Penny's qualities, both good and bad, are what make her who she is.
You mean like that high-pitched, irritating laugh?
Yes.
You wouldn't prefer a throaty chuckle?
You're not changing how Penny laughs.
No, that would be incongruous. I was going to lower the whole voice to a more pleasing register.
Sorry, guys. That girl is freaky.
Come again?
Freaky.
Freaky?
Yeah, freaky.
Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
All right. So, what were some of the operant behaviors that you looked at? Penny's behaviors. Talking during the show. You wanted to increase or decrease? Decrease. Talking during a show. What else? Sitting in his spot. Sitting in his spot, right?
Eating the chocolate
For
for
boys.
boys.
What? Her high pitch, right? Lowering her pitch. Okay. What else?
Pick up the dishes.
Picking up the dishes. Basically becoming his little servant, kind of, right? Okay, so those were some of the behaviors that he was trying to either increase or decrease. And what was the reinforcer that he was using? Chocolate. And what was the term, did anybody catch, that was not defined correctly?
Positive. That was a negative reinforcement to add electric shock in order to prevent.
Yeah, remember he said, if you let me use negative reinforcement, I can have that behavior out, in a week. And so Leonard is, no, you're not going to do that. He's like, oh, come on, I'm just going to use mild electric shocks. So using shocks, mild electric shocks, is actually an example of positive punishment, which we're going to talk about next week. So remember I said negative reinforcement and punishment often get confused. So make sure you all don't confuse it yourself. So now when you hear other people talking about, negative reinforcement and they think they're talking about punishment, you can correct them and say, no, you're actually talking about positive punishment. Yes?
Was the water bottle, the spraying water bottle punishment?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because and we'll learn that because it's something unpleasant that is presented. So that actually is an example of positive punishment. Okay. So when you are, when you are presented with an example and you're trying to figure out what the procedure is, so whether it's positive or negative reinforcement, there are a couple of questions that you need to ask yourself, so that way you are able to correctly identify these principles. So the first question is, what behavior has changed? So you're going to look at your example, and you're first going to identify your operant behavior. Okay, which behavior has changed? So question one is, what behavior has changed? Question two, did the behavior increase or decrease in the future? So today we're talking about reinforcement, which increases behaviors. And next week we will talk about punishment that decreases behavior. And question three, after after the behavior, was something added or removed? So those three questions are going to help you identify in any example whether the procedure is punishment or reinforcement, and then whether specifically is it an example of positive or negative. Okay?
Can you repeat the first one?
Yes.
What behavior has changed?
So question one again. Question one. What behavior has changed? Question two. Did the behavior increase or decrease in the future? And question three, after the behavior occurred, was something added or removed? So now I want to show you some more videos on positive and negative reinforcement, and then it's going to show you actual videos of individuals' behaviors, and you're going to have to identify whether it's positive or negative. Okay?
We are now going to discuss the procedures that increase or enhance behavior. These are positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is the most popular and most chosen principle of behavior change. Some claim that positive reinforcement is the basic building block of human behavior. People are likely to repeat behavior if it produces reinforcement. They are less likely to repeat behavior that does not produce reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is when an occurrence of behavior is followed by the addition of a stimulus which results in increased behavior. Positive reinforcement can be used to increase a wide range of behaviors. It can be used to produce new behaviors, to replace less desirable behaviors, and it can refine the topography, frequency, or duration of existing behavior. A reinforcer is an event that follows a behavior and increases some dimension of that behavior. Reinforcers can be verbal, social, edible, or tangible. They can be delivered in the form of activities, privileges, or as generalized reinforcers such as tokens, points, or money. Reinforcement can be delivered by another, such as mom giving her child a hug after the child gave her a beautiful picture. Reinforcement can be delivered by oneself, such as treating yourself to your favorite candy bar after studying for 1 hour. Reinforcement can also be delivered by your environment or nature, such as seeing a deer in a meadow during an early morning walk. All of these are examples of reinforcers if they increase some dimension of a behavior. Christy had a really bad sunburn. She used aloe lotion to help with the pain. When she applied it, she felt immediate relief. Christy now applies aloe lotion when she has a sunburn. What behavior changed?
So what behavior changed in that last example? The application of aloe.
This is an example of negative reinforcement because Christy was able to escape the pain of a sunburn by increasing the behavior of applying aloe. Negative reinforcement is often confused with punishment. It's the removal of an aversive stimulus that increases the rate of a future behavior. Negative reinforcement is the reduction or termination of an ongoing stimulus that results in the likelihood of a behavior occurring again. When behavior is increased by negative reinforcement, the person is performing the behavior to escape or avoid an aversive stimulus. For example, Jesse drove over the speed limit one day and got a speeding ticket. Jesse started driving the speed limit from then on. First, Jesse's speeding was punished, and then his driving the speed limit is negatively reinforced by avoiding future speeding tickets. Let's see if we can identify the type of reinforcement being used in the following examples. Remember to ask yourself, what behavior changed? Did the behavior increase or decrease? And after the behavior occurred, was something added or taken away? Dan is sleeping. His alarm goes off. Dan is too tired to get up, so he avoids getting out of bed by pushing snooze. Now Dan pushes snooze every time the alarm goes off. What behavior increased?
What behavior increased? Pushing the snooze button.
This is another example of negative reinforcement. This is negative reinforcement because the behavior of pressing snooze increased and Dan avoided getting out of bed. Jane rarely checks her mail. One day, Jane checked her mailbox and got 2 letters. After that, Jane checked the mailbox every day. What behavior changed?
What behavior changed? Checking the mail.
This is positive reinforcement because after Jane received 2 letters, the behavior of checking the mail increased. Jason was talking to his neighbors and throwing items during math class. Mrs. Robin tells him to sit in the back of the class away from his friends. Jason went to the back of the class and just so happened to sit next to Jennifer, who he has had a crush on since 1st grade. Jason started to talk to his neighbors and throw items more often after that, hoping to get sent to the back of the class again. What behavior increased?
So what behavior increased? Throwing the papers. And then is this an example of positive or negative reinforcement? How many think positive? How many think negative? How many don't know?
This is positive reinforcement because after Jane received 2 letters, although this was unintentional, the teacher used positive reinforcement because the behavior increased after he got to sit next to Jennifer.
So do you see how important the consequence of the behavior, like immediately following the behavior, whatever the consequence is important, as far as the teacher thought she was probably, punishing him, trying to decrease that behavior, right? Oh, you threw that, go sit in the back of the room. So for her, she thinks that that's going to decrease the behavior. But in reality, what was he doing? It was reinforcing his behavior because why? What was the consequence? So he moved to the other seat in the back, and then what happened? He got to sit next to the girl he liked, and he got to talk to her. Okay, so something pleasant was really added. So that's why that's an example of positive reinforcement. So that's why it is so important, and we'll talk about functional behavior assessments. It's so important to conduct those, especially when you're looking at behaviors that you're trying to increase or decrease, because to anyone you would think, oh yeah, that's going to decrease the behavior, let's just send him in the back. But you don't know, you have to look at all the different variables so you can see, the function of the behavior.
Pam couldn't study with the TV on, but her roommate always had it on during the time Pam would study. One day, Pam shut the door and she was able to study better. Now Pam shuts the door every time she studies. What behavior increased?
Pam shutting the door. And And is this an example of positive or negative?
Negative.
Negative reinforcement, right? Because it allows the TV noises was
Trying to
removed.
escape it.
Okay. So now everyone should be good with positive and negative reinforcement. I know I gave you guys a lot of examples, but you'll need it. Okay. So some terms to know. A stimulus. And I'll just say them because I don't really want to write it. A stimulus is any object or event that can be detected by one of the senses. So whether it's something you can hear, you can taste, you can smell, you can see. Okay, that's a stimulus. And has potential to influence the behavior. So let me say it again. A stimulus is any object or event that can be detected by one of the senses and has potential to influence the behavior. So keep in mind that the term is influence, so it doesn't mean that, a stimulus is anything that can either increase or decrease the behavior. Okay? For example, let's say you are cold. You're at home, you're freezing in your house. What do? Typically, you're cold. What do? Or what else do?
The heater.
Yeah, you go to the thermostat, which is a stimulus. Okay? So it's an object. It's there. You can see it. That stimulus represents that I can either make my house hot or cold. If you are getting into your car, right? You have your keys. The ignition is a stimulus for putting your keys in, turning, and to turn your car on. If you didn't have a little ignition, or now they have buttons that you can just push in your car, but if you didn't have one of those, then you probably would not start your car. You wouldn't know how to do it because that has been through previous behaviors, right? It has been learned that you see the ignition, you put your keys in, you turn it on. I'm cold, I see the thermostat, I'm going to raise the air or turn on the heater. Okay? Positive reinforcer is any stimulus that is presented immediately after behavior. So positive reinforcer is any stimulus that is presented immediately after behavior. So, in that video we just saw, where the kid was throwing paper across the room, the girl he liked, let's call her Jane, whatever her name is, Jane is a positive reinforcer for his paper throwing behavior. Okay? In the candy store, the candy for the child's tantruming is a positive reinforcer because immediately following tantruming, candy is presented. Aversive stimulus is any stimulus that is removed or avoided immediately after behavior. So aversive stimulus, again, any stimulus that is removed